The billionaire married a homeless woman to fulfill his will. Unexpectedly, she. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The city skyline glittered with towers of glass and steel, each one a monument to wealth and power. Inside the highest of those towers sat a man who, to the world, seemed to have everything. His name was Alexander Stone, billionaire heir. Young, brilliant, ruthless in business. He was the kind of man newspapers called untouchable. But on this particular morning, his perfect world cracked. Alexander sat in a mahogany-paneled office with a lawyer holding a document in his hands. His late father's will. The words burned like fire. In order to inherit the family fortune and remain as head of Stone Enterprises, my son must be legally married within 3 months of my passing. 3 months. 90 days. The legacy of his family, the empire he had spent his life preparing to control, dangled by a thread. His jaw tightened, his fists clenched. To Alexander, marriage had always been a game for others, not for him. He trusted numbers, contracts, and strategies, not emotions, not vows. The lawyer cleared his throat. If you do not comply, the company will be divided among the board. Your cousin Richard has already expressed interest in stepping forward. Alexander's eyes turned cold as steel. Richard was the last man on earth he would hand the company to. No, there was no option to lose. He would marry, but marry whom? That night, he left the tower and walked alone through the city streets, restless, consumed by thought. Rain fell in thin silver threads across the pavement. That was when he saw her. She was sitting on the stone steps of a closed diner, a worn sketchbook balanced on her knees. The girl looked no older than 24, her hair damp from the drizzle, her shoes frayed at the edges. Yet she was not begging, she was drawing. Her hands moved with quiet focus, capturing the neon glow of the city onto paper. A small boy curled beside her, wrapped in a thin blanket. Her brother, perhaps. Alexander slowed his stride. Something in the scene pierced him dignity inside despair. While others hurried past, pretending not to see, she remained steady, her chin lifted, her pencil scratching hope into every line. A man dropped a few coins at her feet, muttering under his breath. She picked them up and pressed them back into his palm with a gentle smile. No, thank you. I am not asking for money. Her voice was calm, almost proud. I sell drawings. If you like, I can sketch your portrait. Alexander's eyes narrowed. She was homeless. That much was clear. But she carried herself with a strange kind of pride. She had nothing, yet refused pity. In that instant, an idea sparked inside his mind. A fake marriage. A contract. No strings, no feelings, just signatures on paper. She needed stability for her brother. He needed a wife for his inheritance. Their worlds could collide in a transaction that served them both. He approached slowly, his tailored shoes splashing in the puddles. She looked up, startled by the presence of a man in an expensive black coat, his expression unreadable. "What is your name?" he asked. Her eyes widened, suspicious but steady. "Elena," she replied after a pause. Alexander's voice was low, deliberate. "Elena, I have a proposition for you. One that could change everything." And so, beneath the rain and city lights, two lives that should never have crossed began a story that neither of them could predict. A billionaire and a homeless woman. A contract marriage born from desperation and pride. What Alexander did not know was that the very decision he made tonight would shatter every rule he believed in. Because some contracts cannot bind the heart, and some bargains cost more than fortune. Elena stared at the stranger in the expensive coat, her pencil frozen above the page. The boy beside her stirred in his sleep, and she pulled the blanket tighter around him. The man's eyes were steady, unreadable, and his voice carried the weight of someone used to being obeyed. "A proposition?" she echoed, suspicion flickering in her tone. "From a man like you to a woman like me, that does not sound safe." Alexander Stone, did not flinch. He lowered himself slightly, leveling his gaze with hers. "You are right to be cautious, but I am not here to harm you. I need a wife, not in the romantic sense, in the legal sense. A contract marriage. You would be compensated generously, and it would change your life." The word marriage hung in the damp night air like thunder. Elena's lips parted in disbelief. She had expected him to offer money for food, maybe to buy one of her sketches out of pity. But marriage? That was insanity. "I do not want your charity," she said firmly, rising to her feet. The rain streaked down her hair, but her eyes blazed with defiance. "I may be poor, but I still have dignity. Whatever you are offering, I am not for sale." Alexander admired the fire in her voice, even as it complicated his plan. Most people in her situation would have leapt at the chance. Yet this woman resisted. That stubborn pride only confirmed his choice. He spoke again, slower this time. "This is not charity. It is business. I inherit a company only if I am married. You need stability for your brother. We could help one another, nothing more." Elena glanced down at the boy, his thin shoulders trembling in the chill. Her heart clenched. For months she had struggled to keep him safe, sketching portraits in exchange for meals, hiding the truth of their situation from him as best she could. His cough had worsened. He needed real medicine, a doctor, maybe even surgery. But hospitals cost more than she could ever earn. Her fingers tightened on the sketchbook. This was madness. To marry a stranger, even for money, was unthinkable. But to watch her brother suffer without help was unbearable. "Why me?" she asked softly, almost to herself. "You could have any woman in this city." "Because you have nothing to gain except survival," Alexander replied without hesitation. "That makes you the one person I can trust not to scheme for my fortune. I need someone who will not demand love, or romance, or power, only the terms of a contract." Elena felt the ground tilt beneath her. His words stripped her bare. He was offering a bargain that appealed not to greed but to her desperation. And yet, his gaze never once looked down on her. It was sharp, calculating, but strangely respectful. She drew in a slow breath. "What would this contract demand of me?" "Appearances," Alexander said simply. "We marry in court. You attend family functions at my side. You live under my roof until the will is satisfied. In return, I provide financial security for you and your brother. After the required time, we dissolve the marriage. Clean and final." Her chest tightened. It sounded so easy when he spoke of it, as if vows were no more than ink on paper. But marriage was sacred to her. She had once dreamed of love, of a partner who chose her for her heart, not her circumstances. Still, her brother's pale face haunted her. She could not ignore reality. She whispered, "And if I refuse?" Alexander's expression did not change. "Then I will find someone else. But I believe you are the only one who can do this with me, Elena." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the hiss of rain on pavement and the hum of neon lights. Elena pressed her sketchbook to her chest, weighing the impossible choice. For the first time in her life, she was asked to trade her freedom for survival. And though every instinct screamed to run, she knew the decision was no longer just about her. She looked at her brother, then back at Alexander, and said, "I will hear the details." The words tasted like surrender and hope all at once. And with that reluctant agreement, the stage was set for a marriage that was never meant to be real, yet carried the seed of something far more dangerous than either of them imagined. The contract was signed within the week. A plain courthouse ceremony, a simple ring slipped onto Elena's finger, and just like that, she was no longer a girl sketching in the shadows of the city. She was the wife of Alexander Stone, the billionaire heir. But stepping into his world was like stepping onto a battlefield. The first blow came at the Stone family estate, a mansion sprawling across acres of manicured gardens and marble halls. Elena's shoes clicked nervously against the polished floor as she followed Alexander into the grand dining room. Dozens of eyes turned toward her, men in tailored suits, women draped in diamonds. The air itself was heavy with wealth and judgment. Richard, Alexander's cousin, leaned back in his chair with a smug smile. "So this is your bride," he drawled, his tone dripping with disdain. "Forgive me, but she looks more like a charity case than a stone." A ripple of laughter spread around the table. Elena's cheeks burned. but she kept her chin high. She would not let them see her break. Alexander's jaw tightened. He placed a firm hand on her back, guiding her to a seat beside him. His voice was sharp enough to cut steel. "This is my wife. Show her respect, or excuse yourself from the table." The room fell silent. Richard's smile faltered, though the malice in his eyes only deepened. Elena glanced at Alexander, surprised. For a man who claimed this was only business, he had defended her with fire. The next challenge came from the media. Within days, newspapers splashed her photograph across their front pages. The billionaire's mystery bride. From rags to riches. Who is Elena Stone? Talk show hosts mocked her background, dissecting her clothes, her posture, even her silence. Paparazzi followed her every step, shouting questions designed to wound. One morning, as she tried to walk her brother to school, a reporter thrust a microphone in her face. "Elena, is it true you were living on the streets before the marriage? How much money are you being paid to play wife?" Her brother flinched, his small hand clutching hers tighter. Elena forced a steady breath, refusing to answer. But inside, shame clawed at her chest. She had agreed to the contract, yet she had not realized the cost would be this brutal. That evening, she found Alexander waiting in the penthouse kitchen. He had dismissed the staff, and for the first time, they were alone without the armor of public roles. "They are cruel," he admitted, pouring her a glass of water. "They will not stop. But you must remember their words are nothing." Elena looked at him, her voice trembling. "Easy for you to say. You were born into this. I am drowning in their hatred. They do not see me as your wife. They see me as a fraud." His gaze softened, though his tone remained steady. "Then prove them wrong. Hold your head higher than all of them. They feed on weakness. Do not give them a taste." It was not comfort, not in the way she craved, but it was strength. And strangely, it steadied her. Still, the War of Worlds did not end. At a charity gala, she stood beside Alexander in a borrowed gown, while whispers swirled like smoke. "She does not belong here. A tramp in silk. How long until he discards her?" Elena lifted her chin, forcing a smile for the cameras. But when a young waiter stumbled and spilled champagne across his uniform, she was the only one to kneel, grabbing napkins to help him clean. Guests stared, some horrified, some mocking. Alexander, however, watched in silence, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. Later, in the car, he broke the silence. Most people would have screamed at the waiter, "You helped him." Elena shrugged lightly, though her heart pounded. He was embarrassed. "I know what that feels like. Why make it worse?" Alexander said nothing, but his gaze lingered on her longer than it should have. The worlds they came from clashed like fire and water, wealth against poverty, pride against prejudice. Yet within that storm, Alexander began to see a truth he had not expected. His wife by contract was not a burden. She was a mirror, reflecting back everything he had forgotten about humanity. And though he would never admit it aloud, the cold fortress around his heart was beginning to crack. The days turned into weeks, and the contract marriage settled into a rhythm neither of them had expected. Elena rose early each morning to prepare her brother for school, often humming softly as she packed his simple lunch. She insisted on doing these small tasks herself, despite the house staff offering their services. To her, caring for her brother was sacred, something money could never replace. Alexander watched from a distance at first, observing with a curiosity that unsettled him. He had imagined she would bask in luxury, indulge in her new title as his wife, even if it was only temporary. Instead, she moved through the mansion with quiet humility, her sketchbook always tucked under her arm, as if it were her true treasure. One evening, Alexander returned home earlier than expected. He found her in the servants' corridor, kneeling beside an elderly maid who had dropped a tray. Elena was helping the woman gather the shattered pieces of china, murmuring words of comfort. Her hands were cut from the shards, but she smiled through the pain, insisting it was nothing. When the maid left, Alexander stepped forward. "You did not have to do that," he said, his tone low but firm. Elena looked up at him, her palms still bleeding slightly. "And you think kindness is something I should ration?" She was frightened. She would lose her job over a broken dish. No one deserves that. For a moment, Alexander had no reply. He was used to a world where mistakes were punished, where weakness was scorned. Yet here was a woman with nothing, choosing compassion over fear. Later that night, he found himself in the library, turning over her words again and again. The empire he inherited had been built on power plays and ruthless decisions. But Elena was teaching him, without even trying, that dignity came from how one treated those with less, not more. The shift in him deepened a few days later, when he returned from a business meeting to find Elena sitting on the floor with her brother. They were surrounded by crayons and sketchbooks, laughter spilling into the air like sunlight. She had drawn a crude but charming portrait of Alexander himself, exaggerated brows and all. Her brother giggled, pointing. "Look, it is him, but funny." Alexander stood at the doorway, something stirring in his chest he could not name. He had not laughed like that in years. For a fleeting moment, he imagined what it would be like if this were real. If the boy were his son, if Elena were truly his wife, not just in name, the thought unsettled him, and yet he did not turn away. The following weekend, the family hosted another grand gala, a stage for wealth and reputation. Elena, draped in a gown loaned from Alexander's sister, entered on his arm. The whispers began immediately, sharp and poisonous. But this time, Alexander noticed something new. Elena smiled through it all, not with defiance, but with grace. She carried herself with a quiet strength that silenced even the boldest of critics. At one point, a young intern serving wine stumbled, spilling a glass across the pristine tablecloth. Gasps rippled through the room. Guests sneered, ready to condemn. Before anyone could speak, Elena stood and placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "It is all right," she said warmly. "Accidents happen. Let me help." Her words diffused the tension instantly. The boy nearly wept with gratitude. Alexander's chest tightened as he watched. To the world, she was a scandal. To him, she was becoming something far more dangerous. That night, as the car rolled them back to the penthouse, Alexander broke the silence. "You have a way of disarming people," he admitted. Elena turned her gaze to the city lights outside. "I do not disarm them. I simply treat them the way I wish someone would treat me." The simplicity of her answer struck him harder than any business rival's blow. In that moment, Alexander realized the walls he had built around his heart were beginning to crumble. The marriage might have begun as a contract, but something far more powerful was taking root. He did not yet dare to name it, but for the first time in years, Alexander Stone was afraid that what he was feeling could not be contained by any contract, no matter how tightly written. The weeks that followed wove threads of something unexpected into the fabric of their arrangement. What had begun as a contract was softening into routine, and routine was turning into something dangerously close to intimacy. One Friday evening, a sudden storm swept across the city. Traffic froze, power flickered, and Alexander's car was forced to stop several blocks from the penthouse. Instead of waiting for his driver to maneuver through the chaos, he decided to walk. By the time he arrived, rainwater clung to his hair and soaked his coat. Inside the penthouse, Elena was curled on the sofa with her brother, the glow of lamplight warming the room. They were sketching side by side, laughter bubbling from the boy as he teased her over a crooked drawing. When Alexander stepped in, dripping wet, Elena rushed forward with a towel, scolding without hesitation. "You will catch pneumonia if you stay like this," she said firmly, pressing the towel into his hands. Alexander blinked, caught off guard. Few people dared to speak to him that way. Yet here she was, a woman who owed him nothing but the terms of a contract, fussing over him like he mattered. He found himself smiling, a rare, unguarded smile. Later that night, the storm knocked out the power. The penthouse went dark, except for the candles Elena lit from a drawer she had prepared for emergencies. She set them carefully across the living room, their flames casting soft halos against the walls. Her brother fell asleep on the rug, curled under a blanket, leaving Alexander and Elena sitting across from each other in the flickering light. She poured them both tea, her hands steady despite the shadows. "It reminds me of when we were on the streets," she said quietly. "We would light whatever we could find and pretend it was a campfire. My brother loved those nights. He thought we were adventurers instead of homeless." Alexander listened, his chest tightening. For the first time, he realized how much resilience it had taken for her to survive, to keep her brother's spirit alive in the darkest circumstances. He admired her more than he dared to say. When she looked up, her gaze met his, steady and unflinching. "Do you ever feel," she asked softly, "that life has given you everything except what matters most?" The question lingered between them, heavier than the storm outside. Alexander wanted to tell her yes. He wanted to confess that despite the skyscrapers and the empire, he felt emptier than she could ever imagine. But the words caught in his throat. Instead, he simply nodded, and that silent admission spoke louder than any confession. The following day, Alexander found himself drifting closer to Elena and her brother, in ways he never expected. He shared breakfast with them, not at the long dining table with silver cutlery, but at the small kitchen island where Elena served pancakes she had made herself. He joined them at a park, watching her brother race across the grass while Elena sketched the skyline. To outsiders, it might have looked like a family. To Alexander, it felt like a life he had never dared to dream. But in the quiet corners of his heart, fear grew alongside affection. This was not supposed to happen. The contract had been clear, the boundaries well drawn. And yet, with every shared laugh and every moment of warmth, Alexander Stone was losing control of the one thing he valued most: his ability to remain untouched. He could not deny it any longer. Somewhere, between obligation and convenience, he had begun to want her. And that want was more dangerous than any corporate rival or family feud he had ever faced. The turning point arrived with the kind of cruelty only power and envy could summon. It began with whispers, quiet and poisonous, spreading through the social circles of New York City. Then the tabloids picked it up, splashing headlines in bold across every morning edition. Billionaire Alexander Stone's wife exposed. From the streets to the penthouse, photographs appeared, grainy shots of Elena and her brother huddled near a diner, her sketchbook clutched to her chest, proof of the life she had tried so hard to keep private. Within hours, the story dominated every screen. News anchors dissected her past. Pundits mocked Alexander, claiming he had dragged the Stone name into the gutter. At the Stone Enterprises boardroom, the atmosphere was tense and venomous. Richard, Alexander's cousin, slid a newspaper across the polished table, his smirk sharp as a blade. "You see? This is the woman you chose to represent us. A homeless girl. The scandal is already costing us investors. The only solution is clear. Annul the marriage, or step down as CEO." Alexander's jaw clenched, his knuckles whitening around the armrest of his chair. "I will not be dictated to by gossip columns," he said through gritted teeth. Richard leaned forward, voice silky with menace. "It is not gossip when the entire city believes it. You have a choice, Alexander. Her or the company." The words struck like a hammer, and for the first time, Alexander felt the walls of his carefully constructed world closing in. Meanwhile, Elena bore the brunt of the storm outside those walls. Reporters hounded her every step, shouting questions that cut deeper than knives. Parents at her brother's school whispered, pulling their children away. In the grocery store, strangers sneered, their eyes heavy with judgment. One evening, as she walked home from the market, a woman stopped her on the sidewalk, voice dripping with scorn. "You should be ashamed, dragging a man like him down. Everyone knows you are only there for his money." Elena froze, clutching her bag tighter. For a moment, the urge to fight back rose in her chest. But when she returned to the penthouse and saw her brother asleep, she felt only exhaustion. This life was not hers. She had stepped into Alexander's world, and the world was tearing her apart. That night, Alexander found her on the balcony, her arms wrapped around herself against the cold wind. "They are destroying me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "And they are destroying you because of me. I cannot watch you lose everything because of my past." He stepped closer, his voice fierce. "Do not blame yourself. They fear what they cannot control. You have done nothing wrong." "Oh so." But Elena shook her head, tears glistening in her eyes. "You are wrong. I should never have agreed to this. It was supposed to be business, not destruction. I will not let you sacrifice your legacy for me." Her words cut deeper than any headline. For the first time, Alexander saw the weight she carried, not just for herself, but for him. And though anger burned in his veins, a colder fear crept in. What if she truly meant to leave? The storm reached its peak at a charity gala. Paparazzi swarmed the entrance, hurling cruel questions as Alexander and Elena stepped from the car. Inside, the whispers were louder than the music. One guest sneered openly. How long before she drags him into the gutter with her? Before Alexander could react, Elena straightened her shoulders, her voice calm but resolute. "Excuse me," she said, her hand slipping from his. "I need some air." He watched her walk away, his chest tightening with a dread he could not name. Later that night, when he returned to the penthouse, she was gone. No note, no explanation, only her sketchbook left behind on the table, open to a drawing of the three of them, Alexander, Elena, and her brother, smiling together beneath a sky full of stars. The sight pierced him deeper than any betrayal. For Alexander Stone, who had built his empire on control and calculation, this was the first time he realized he might be powerless, because the woman who had entered his life as a contract had now taken something far greater with her, his heart. Alexander tore through the penthouse that night, calling Elena's name as though sheer force of will could bring her back. But the rooms echoed only with silence. The staff said she had left quietly, carrying nothing except a small bag. No chauffeur, no escort. Just a woman walking away from the fortress of glass and steel that had never truly been hers. The next morning, the headlines screamed louder than ever. Elena Stone abandons, husband amid scandal. Commentators twisted her absence into betrayal, painting her as a gold digger who had taken what she wanted and vanished. For the first time in his life, Alexander felt powerless against words. He had fought rivals, outmaneuvered board members, conquered markets. But this emptiness he could not fight. Richard wasted no time. He stormed into Alexander's office, his smirk sharp with victory. "Your wife has disgraced you. Investors are pulling out. Step down, cousin, before you ruin us all." Alexander's eyes burned with fury, but beneath it was a hollow ache. He had defended Elena, trusted her, even begun to hope, and now she was gone, leaving him to face the storm alone. The board was circling. Richard's ambition was tightening like a noose, and the empire Alexander had sworn to protect was slipping through his fingers. At night, he wandered through the penthouse, drawn again and again to the sketchbook she had left behind. He traced the lines of her drawings with his fingertips. A street corner glowing with neon, her brother's wide smile, and that final page of them, together beneath the stars. Every stroke of pencil was a reminder that what they had shared had been real, even if it had been born from a lie. Meanwhile, Elena kept to the shadows of the city. She rented a small room near the hospital where her brother was being treated with the money she had quietly placed aside. She told herself she had done the right thing, that by leaving, she had spared Alexander the ruin of his legacy. Yet every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face on that balcony, fierce with determination, begging her to stay. Her heart whispered she had made a mistake, but her mind clung to the belief that sacrifice was her only path to protect him. And so they lived apart, both drowning in the silence left by the other. For Alexander, it was a silence filled with rage, betrayal, and a pain he had never known. For Elena, it was a silence filled with longing, guilt, and the hope that perhaps, one day, he might forgive her. Neither realized that in the shadows of their separation, a darker force was moving, one that would test not only their hearts, but the fragile truth that bound them together. Alexander's breaking point came when the lies grew louder than the truth. One evening, after a brutal board meeting where Richard once again demanded his resignation, Alexander returned to the penthouse to find an envelope on his desk. Inside were copies of financial records, secretly obtained by his assistant. They showed that Elena had never touched his accounts, never withdrawn a single dollar beyond what she needed for her brother's care. Every cent she had used had gone directly to the hospital. The revelation hit him like a lightning strike. She had not betrayed him. She had protected him, even as she vanished. Every cruel headline, every whisper of gold digging, had been a lie. The woman he had doubted was the one person who had stood unshaken by greed. Fueled by a fire he could not contain, Alexander acted. He stormed into a press conference Richard had arranged to announce his downfall. Cameras flashed as Alexander strode to the podium, his voice sharp as steel. "You speak of disgrace," he said, eyes locking on Richard. "But the only disgrace here is the betrayal within this family. My wife, Elena Stone, is not the fraud. She is the only one among us who has lived with honor. She asked for nothing, even when she deserved everything. And I will no longer remain silent while cowards drag her name through the mud." The room erupted with noise, reporters shouting questions, but Alexander ignored them. He walked out with a single purpose. That night, he traced Elena to the modest apartment near the hospital. When she opened the door, shock widened her eyes. She looked thinner, paler, her strength drained from weeks of struggle. "Alexander," she breathed, her voice trembling, "you should not be here." He stepped inside without hesitation. "You left because you thought you were saving me, but Elena, you are the only thing worth saving." Tears welled in her eyes. "I could not let them destroy you. Your company, your family's name." "None of it matters," he interrupted, his voice fierce with conviction. "Do you not see? The empire, the fortune, the legacy, it is all worthless without you. You gave me something I never had, something money cannot buy: dignity, humanity, love." Elena's hands trembled as he reached for them. For so long she had convinced herself she was the weak link, the flaw in his perfect world. Yet here he was, choosing her, not in spite of her scars, but because of them. For the first time since she left, hope flickered in her heart. Alexander Stone, the man who once believed in nothing but contracts, was fighting for her with a truth no power could erase. And in that fragile moment, Elena realized she had never truly been alone. She had always carried his heart with her. Now, standing in the dim light of her small apartment, she faced the one truth neither of them could deny. Their love had outgrown the walls of any contract. The storm finally broke in the most public way possible. Days after Alexander found Elena, he returned to Stone Enterprises for the board's decisive meeting. Reporters crowded the lobby, their cameras ready to capture his downfall. Richard was already inside, smug with victory, certain his cousin would either step down or be stripped of power. But when Alexander entered the boardroom, Elena was at his side. She wore no diamonds, no silks, only a simple dress, her hand clasped firmly in his. The board members erupted in murmurs, scandalized by her presence. Richard rose, his voice dripping with venom. "You dare to bring her here? She has disgraced this family name." Alexander faced him with steady eyes. "The disgrace is not hers. It is yours, Richard. You plotted to use her past as a weapon, but all you proved is your own greed. Elena has lived with nothing and still carried herself with more honor than anyone in this room. She is my wife, not by contract, not by convenience, but by choice." The silence that followed was thunderous. For the first time, the board saw not just the ruthless businessman, but a leader willing to stand for truth, even at the cost of empire. Some lowered their eyes in shame, others nodded slowly, recognizing integrity when it stared them down. Richard sputtered, but his power crumbled. Within days, the board voted him out, citing misconduct and manipulation. Stone Enterprises remained under Alexander's control, but more importantly, his heart was free of the chains that had bound him for so long. Later, Alexander took Elena and her brother to the place where their story had begun. The diner steps under the neon lights. There, he dropped to one knee, not as a billionaire, not as a man fulfilling a contract, but as someone stripped of pride and armor. "Elena," he said, his voice carrying through the night air, "the first time I saw you here, I thought you would save my inheritance. I was wrong. You saved me. Will you be my wife again, this time for love, not for duty?" Tears streamed down her cheeks as she whispered, "Yes." Her brother clapped his hands with joy, and for the first time in years, Alexander felt whole. Their story closed, not with wealth or scandal, but with truth. A man who had everything discovered the one thing he could not buy. A woman who had nothing found she had always been enough. Together, they stepped forward into a life no contract could contain, their love forged not in power, but in choice. And so, beneath the same city lights that once revealed their differences, Alexander and Elena began again, husband and wife, partners in hope, equals in love. The empire would endure, but their greatest fortune was each other.